Visceral fat is often misunderstood as a simple consequence of aging or lack of discipline, but in reality, it is a deeply intelligent biological response shaped by survival mechanisms that have protected humans for thousands of years. This type of fat develops not because the body is failing, but because it is adapting to signals that suggest instability, stress, inflammation, or uncertainty in the environment, especially as we grow older and the body becomes more cautious with its energy reserves. When daily life feels unpredictable, when sleep is shallow, meals are irregular, movement is inconsistent, or stress becomes a constant background noise, the body interprets these conditions as potential threats, and in response, it stores energy close to vital organs where it can be accessed quickly if needed. This is visceral fat acting as a protective buffer rather than an enemy. For many older adults, years of responsibility, worry, disrupted routines, and repeated dieting attempts create a hormonal environment dominated by cortisol and insulin, both of which strongly encourage visceral fat storage, and the body holds on to this fat not out of stubbornness, but out of caution, believing that difficult times may continue and energy must be preserved. This understanding shifts the entire approach to fat loss, because if visceral fat forms in response to perceived danger, it will not disappear through force, punishment, or extremes. Aggressive dieting, excessive exercise, and constant self-criticism only reinforce the message that the body is under threat, making it more likely to protect visceral fat even more tightly. The moment the body begins to experience consistency, nourishment, and calm, its priorities change. Regular meals made from whole foods tell the body that fuel is reliable. Gentle daily movement signals that strength and mobility are being maintained, and improved sleep reassures the nervous system that recovery is possible. These signals collectively reduce the need for emergency energy storage around the organs. Supportive routines create safety at a biological level, lowering stress hormones and improving insulin sensitivity, which directly unlocks visceral fat stores. And because visceral fat is metabolically active, once the body no longer sees a reason to keep it, it becomes one of the first fat reserves to be released. This process is not driven by willpower, but by trust. Trust built through repetition of small, manageable habits that the body learns it can rely on. Over time, the internal environment shifts from defensive to balanced, and visceral fat, which thrives in chaos and stress, loses its purpose. For older adults especially, this realization can be deeply freeing because it removes blame and replaces it with understanding. The body is not working against you, it has been working for you all along, responding to the information it was given, and when that information changes, the response changes too. Visceral fat begins to shrink not when the body is pushed harder, but when it finally feels supported enough to let go. A healthy, calming diet does far more than control weight. It communicates directly with hormones that decide whether visceral fat is stored or released. And among these hormones, insulin plays a central role. When insulin remains high throughout the day due to frequent eating, refined carbohydrates, or sugary foods, visceral fat stays locked in place. But when insulin is allowed to rise and fall naturally, the body gains access to its stored energy, especially the fat stored deep around the organs. For older adults, this hormonal sensitivity becomes even more important because aging bodies respond more strongly to blood sugar swings, processed foods, and irregular eating patterns, which can quietly increase inflammation and fat storage without obvious warning signs. A calming diet is not restrictive but stabilizing, built around foods that digest slowly, nourish tissues, and reduce internal stress. Whole foods such as vegetables, fruits, legumes, eggs, fish, yogurt, nuts, seeds, and minimally processed grains provide fiber, protein, and healthy fats that slow glucose absorption and prevent sharp insulin spikes. This steady energy supply reassures the body that fuel is dependable, reducing the perceived need to store fat for emergencies. Meal timing also carries powerful biological signals. Constant snacking, even on healthy foods, keeps insulin elevated and prevents fat release, while predictable meals with natural gaps in between allow insulin levels to fall, creating windows where visceral fat becomes accessible for energy. This does not require extreme fasting, but simply allowing the body time to finish digesting and resetting between meals. Inflammation is another key factor linking diet to visceral fat. Processed foods, excess sugar, and unhealthy fats increase inflammatory signals that encourage fat cells to stay in place, while anti-inflammatory foods support metabolic health and gut balance. Fiber feeds beneficial gut bacteria that produce compounds, improving insulin sensitivity and reducing inflammation, creating an internal environment where visceral fat no longer serves a protective role. Protein deserves special attention in a calming diet. Adequate protein supports muscle maintenance, improves satiation, and reduces cravings, which helps stabilize blood sugar and prevents overeating without conscious restriction. This is especially important with age, as muscle loss can slow metabolism and make fat loss more difficult. Hydration supports this process quietly but effectively. Adequate water intake helps the liver process fat efficiently and supports digestion. And since visceral fat is closely linked to liver function, proper hydration indirectly accelerates fat metabolism. A calming diet is not about strict rules or perfection, it is about consistency and trust. When the body experiences steady nourishment day after day, hormonal chaos begins to settle. Insulin sensitivity improves, inflammation decreases, and visceral fat becomes unnecessary, not because it was fought, but because the body no longer needs its protection. Light, consistent exercise has a unique and powerful effect on visceral fat, especially for older adults, because it works with the body's natural rhythms rather than overwhelming them. Unlike intense or exhausting workouts that can raise stress hormones, gentle movement lowers blood sugar, improves circulation, and sends a clear signal that stored energy can be used safely. Visceral fat is metabolically active and closely tied to how often muscles demand fuel. When muscles are used regularly, even at low intensity, the body increases fat oxidation to meet energy needs. And because visceral fat exists as a quick access reserve, it is one of the first sources the body turns to during repeated moderate activity. Walking stands out as one of the most effective forms of exercise for this reason. A daily walk engages large muscle groups, improves insulin sensitivity, and reduces cortisol levels, all of which directly influence visceral fat storage. For older adults, walking also protects joints, supports balance, and improves cardiovascular health, making it sustainable over long periods, which is what ultimately drives fat loss. Consistency matters more than intensity. Brief bouts of movement spread throughout the day can be just as effective as longer sessions. Gentle cycling, swimming, light dancing, or even household activities keep muscles active and blood sugar stable, preventing long periods of inactivity that encourage fat storage. Light resistance exercise adds another important layer. Muscle tissue plays a crucial role in regulating metabolism, and maintaining even modest levels of muscle mass improves the body's ability to handle glucose and burn fat throughout the day. Simple movements using body weight, resistance bands, or light weights can stimulate muscle without placing excessive strain on joints or the nervous system. As muscle function improves, the body becomes more efficient at using energy, reducing the need to store excess fat around the organs. This shift does not happen overnight, but it compounds over time as regular movement retrains metabolic pathways. Exercise also influences hormones beyond insulin. Gentle physical activity improves mood, reduces anxiety, and supports better sleep, all of which lower cortisol. Since cortisol strongly promotes visceral fat storage, its reduction creates a hormonal environment where fat release becomes easier and more natural. For older adults, the emotional relationship with exercise is just as important as the physical one. Movement that feels enjoyable and manageable is more likely to become a lifelong habit, and habits shape biology more powerfully than short bursts of effort. When light exercise becomes a daily rhythm rather than a challenge to endure, the body responds with gradual strength, improved mobility, and a steady reduction in visceral fat, not because it was forced, but because regular movement reminded the body that it is capable, active, and safe. Lifestyle habits quietly shape the internal environment of the body, often more powerfully than diet or exercise alone. And when it comes to visceral fat, sleep, stress, hydration, and daily rhythm act as hidden switches that determine whether this deep fat is stored or released, especially as the body ages and becomes more sensitive to hormonal signals. Sleep is one of the most underestimated factors in visceral fat accumulation. Insufficient or poor quality sleep disrupts the balance of hormones that regulate appetite, blood sugar, and fat storage, and it significantly raises cortisol, a stress hormone that specifically encourages fat to be stored around vital organs. When sleep becomes deep and regular, cortisol levels naturally fall, insulin sensitivity improves, and the body regains its ability to access stored fat for energy. For older adults, even small improvements in sleep can have profound effects. Establishing a consistent bedtime, reducing screen exposure in the evening, and creating a calm pre-sleep routine signals the nervous system that it is safe to rest, and this sense of safety is essential for visceral fat release. Stress management works through similar biological pathways. The body does not differentiate between physical danger and emotional stress. Constant worry, time pressure, or unresolved tension keeps the nervous system in a state of alert, maintaining high cortisol levels throughout the day. This hormonal state favors visceral fat storage as a protective response. Simple practices that calm the nervous system can reverse this pattern. Slow breathing, gentle stretching, quiet reflection, prayer, meditation, or spending time in nature all lower stress hormones and shift the body into a restorative mode. When stress decreases, the body no longer feels the need to hold on to emergency energy reserves. Hydration supports these processes in subtle but essential ways. Dehydration increases cortisol and places extra strain on the liver, an organ central to fat metabolism. Adequate water intake helps the liver process fats more efficiently and supports digestion and circulation, indirectly accelerating the breakdown of visceral fat. Daily rhythm and routine also play a critical role. Irregular schedules confuse hormonal signaling, while predictable patterns create stability. Eating meals at similar times, moving the body regularly, and resting at consistent intervals teach the body what to expect, reducing the perceived need for protective fat storage. For older adults, creating a lifestyle that prioritizes calm and predictability is not a luxury but a biological necessity. These habits gradually reshape the internal environment from one of defense to one of balance. As cortisol decreases, insulin sensitivity improves, inflammation lowers, and the body begins to release visceral fat naturally, not through effort or struggle, but as a response to a life that feels safer, steadier, and more supportive. A positive, compassionate mindset is often overlooked in discussions about fat loss, yet it shapes the biological environment in which all physical changes occur, especially for older adults who may carry years of frustration, self-blame, and disappointment about their health. The way you think about your body influences how consistently you care for it, and consistency is what changes hormones, metabolism, and long-term outcomes. When the inner dialogue is harsh and critical, the body experiences this as stress, activating the same hormonal pathways triggered by external threats. Cortisol rises, inflammation increases, and the body becomes more protective, holding on to visceral fat as a form of security, even when diet and exercise are present. This internal tension can quietly slow progress. Compassion changes this dynamic. Treating the body with patience and understanding lowers psychological stress, creating a calmer nervous system that supports fat release. This is not about ignoring responsibility, but about shifting from punishment to partnership, where healthy choices come from care rather than fear. Belief plays a powerful role in behavior. When older adults believe change is still possible, they are more likely to show up for daily walks, prepare nourishing meals, and prioritize rest. These repeated actions reshape hormonal signals over time, while hopelessness or discouragement often leads to inconsistency, which the body interprets as instability. A positive mindset also reframes setbacks. Missed workouts or imperfect meals are no longer seen as failures, but as normal parts of life. This flexibility prevents the stress spirals that often derail long-term progress, allowing the body to remain in a steady, fat-burning state rather than shifting back into defense mode. Gratitude and self-awareness further support this process. Noticing small improvements in energy, mobility, sleep, or mood reinforces motivation and strengthens the connection between effort and outcome. This awareness builds trust, and trust is essential for sustaining healthy habits. For older adults, mindset also influences identity, shifting from seeing oneself as too old or past change to seeing oneself as capable of improvement alters daily choices at a subconscious level. These choices accumulate, gradually changing the internal environment that governs visceral fat storage. The body responds to repetition more than intensity, and a positive mindset makes repetition possible because it removes the emotional weight from the process, allowing healthy behaviors to become routine rather than burdensome. When the mind is kind, hopeful, and patient, the body follows, releasing visceral fat not because it is forced, but because it senses stability, trust, and care, and no longer needs to hold on to what once felt protective.